and we thank you for having us, and we thank the organizers, Julia and Maria. Um, I think we can start clockwise. Anti-clockwise, yeah. So yeah, we have great artists within us, and I want us to put the discussion of the day into context, and as regards African art and how it is being perceived in the society and globally. And being in the field of African art and art history, most times African art is being um, looked at as being primitive and in most cases, and but something that is that brings these artists together is that through their artwork they're changing the narrative from the context to content and to the medium and the way of practice. So that is something that I see that brings them together. So I want to start with Abraham. Yeah. So I just wanted to, like, your work has often engaged narrative and material potentials of image and objects, challenging traditional modes of representation. Can you discuss how your approach to photography as a medium contributes to reframing African art and its narrative?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Can I show some work as well?
Yeah.
As well? Okay. Let's use this one. Yeah. So I work with photography, and I've always thought about photography as something that is very rigid and two-dimensional. And how do you break from that two-dimensionality? How do you make something that is so rigid, elastic? And that's because of how it's about how stories are told, right? When one starts to think about stories around identity, representation, or colonial history, it tends to be very linear. And I'm very interested in breaking that linearity, and as a result, I started thinking about materiality, started thinking about collage as a strategy of form making, started thinking about experimenting with different materials like Xerox or lithography, something just so basic, or even just thinking about the texture of a paper, how that lends itself when things are printed on it or when you cut things out and displace them. I love music and I love ambient music. Composition is very central to my practice. Books are very central to my practice. In other words, knowledge production and engaging it. You think about ambient music and how, one of my best compositions from ambient music is Brian Eno's Music for Airports. And I've always asked myself, like, how do I create something that transcends the two-dimensionality of the medium so that one can feel? How do you create feeling? And that has just led me onto this journey of just kind of like experimenting with the medium itself, like having to print on transparencies and placing it on top of a fiber paper so that it creates different layers of texture, using repetition as a strategy of form making, drawing sometimes on the paper as well. I think it's key in terms of expanding my ideas and using installation as a basis as well, and also using objects as a way to expand my photography, so to speak. So this work is titled Rock Anatomy, and it stems from my journey to the central part of Nigeria that was majorly mined by the British in 1910 to about 1950, thereabout, before oil was discovered in Nigeria. I'm Nigerian, by the way, and of course, for those who don't know, Nigeria was colonized by Britain. Mining was very, very central to, the colonial practice. And tin was very, very important for them at the time. And this was done in a place called Jos in Plateau State, in the north central part of Nigeria. Also, one of the things you'll find is tailings and mining ponds in different parts of the landscape of Jos. And this is interesting for me. I never knew of that history until I visited at the time with my fiancée, now my wife. And I was asking, I was like, oh, what are these like? Oh, yeah. From the plane, I was like, oh, these are really beautiful. These are lots of lakes in Jos. She's like, no, these are not lakes. This is what they call mining pond. I didn't even know what that term was, like mining pond. What is that? So she defined it. I was like, it's also known as tailings. I was like, oh wow, this is interesting. I remember I almost ruined that Christmas actually because I'd gone to visit the family and all I was interested in talking about was just these ponds and this history of mining. I was like, oh my goodness. But then it just set me on this journey of this sort of like idea around land as a body, but also even me, myself, eventually getting to do the work after like 5 years, engaging in land and walking through the land and then finding ways in which I can engage the land as an anatomy, the body itself, but also my own body within the land itself. And that's what has resulted to this work. So these rocks that you find on this side in the installation view serves as some type of residue from this, they serve as testaments of, mining from these landscapes. And on the other part as well, the same rocks were printed on transparencies that was placed on a fiber paper. So these are two materials that you find here. One of the things that's very interesting for me again is using archives and using books and diagrams as language, as coded language of colonial legacy. I'm interested in diagrams as some type of like hieroglyphs, as it comes to like form making, but also think about them as language. But then you think about how do I begin to extract these forms and place them within the land, but also use them outside of that again, use them as some type of like vinyls where images are placed on as well. This for me is also very important because these diagrams were taken from a book that I but I found in Johannesburg on one of my trips. And I asked this man I was trying to do research on mining in Africa, and I remember this older man just went inside the store and said I should give him a minute. And eventually came back with this book titled Methodological Practice on something that has to do with mining that was published in 1912. It was just fascinating because all I could see in that book was all methodological drawings. And I just thought, wow, this is fascinating. And I remember not being able to make sense of it because it was just too complex. I'm not a scientist. I don't pretend to be. But I can understand that this aesthetic itself has some type of like violence hidden within it itself. And I'm very interested in that. How do I begin to think about that complexity and use it within the framework of my photography? And that is what has bettered this sort of like collage again that I've done. But again, you see the diagrams being used from archives. And they still do mining in Jos today, by the way, but kind of like illegal mining on the same landscape. That's sort of like continuing again. So the same diagram is used here, but then it's used differently again as stencils here, where works are kind of like placed on it as well. The same thing with this as well. Just thinking about the material, the paper itself. and thinking about how do I, use this sort of like simple, basic object itself, but then create this relationship between this diagram and my body itself. So that has led to this life of mine, which is mine as in the mining landscape, but also mine as in me. I think lastly, colonial self-portrait also, looking at representation and looking at the colonialists, and then infusing my body within the framework itself, kind of like disrupt power. This image here, by the way, that's Mallory. This image it's a still image from a moving picture of Nigeria's independence from 1960, October 31st, 1960, yeah, October 1st, yeah. Yeah, so. And lastly, constructed realities, kind of like looking again at colonial legacy and looking at archives, texts, images, and creating some type of like visual essay, creating some type of like construction that has to do with, certain things that, like words are not enough, and you begin to look for different elements and ways in which one can engage certain things that kind of like transcends how one feels. Because these images, sometimes you look at them and you think, oh, why do I feel this? Why do I feel uncomfortable? Or why do I feel a certain way? So these are basically my offering for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abraham.
There you are.
Coincidentally, I did my high school in Jos, and I'm familiar with those landscapes. And I can see you talking about environment and degradation of the environment, not just in Africa. In most places, you see when resources are excavated, they don't um, they don't replace it. So yeah, and exposure of people and all that. So I see you preaching that message of sustainability, even those works. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah, we can come back to you, but let's just so that Mallory, yeah, your multidisciplinary practice incorporates textiles, ceramics, photography to explore the themes such as immigration, cultural trauma, and so how do these diverse mediums allow you to navigate and express the complexities of African and African diasporic identities?
Hi everybody, I just wanted to say thank you for being with us tonight. That's a true joy for me to be in discussion and in dialogue with all of you. Huge thank you to Julie Cruz and all the department and Maria as well for organizing and making place for us tonight. I grew up in Montreal from a Cameroonian father and a mother that come from Belgium. And while I was young, I traveled a lot to Cameroon, so I spent part of my childhood in Cameroon, part of my childhood in Montreal. And so I would say that from an early age, photograph became very important in my understanding of my cultural heritage and in my identity formation. We had a lot of boxes of photograph and family album in my home with, like my father immigrated in Belgium in the 80s, and then he met my mother there, and so there were photographs of them there, but also their life before that individually. And so In 2018, I believe, I went back to Cameroon for the first time alone to lead a research residency in Banjul Station, who's one of the first art museum in Cameroon, in West Cameroon, so in the highlands region of the country. And that museum has been founded by Barthélemy Togo, an important painter and multidisciplinary artist from France and Cameroon. And so it was very much like the first time that I was going out for research. I was not even calling myself an artist at the time. I mean, I was so young, and so I started to dig into photographic family archive at that moment, and that was sparked by archive photograph that my father gave me before that travel. Just a really small black and white photograph from the post-independence from the 60s of him and his stepbrother holding hand, and him, like my father, wearing a traditional white bubu, and his stepbrother wearing this elephant pants and and hats. And so that kind of aesthetic kind of stayed with me. And I was very curious as of when the more I dig into my family archive, the more I discover more photographs that had that black and white in studio posing with this kind of extravagant mise en scène. And I was very curious of why they were kind of all looking alike. So so after that, and then during that residency, I was very much connected to the red soil of West Cameroon, because the family village is in the mountains. The more you go high in the region, the more iron oxide there is in the soil, so the more red the soil become. And I remember when I was young, I asked my father why the soil is red, to which he answered, because a lot of people had to die there for you to stand on it. And so that always stayed with me, because it was kind of his poetic way to translate kind of the history of a genocide in that region in the 80s. And so all of these elements stay with me and then developed. And I come from a family of male sewer in Cameroon. So my grandfather was a sewer, my uncle is a sewer, and then in Douala we have a textile workshop. And so I kind of learned to sew with them each summer. I was coming back to Douala. And so during that residency, I started to develop this process of dyeing with the red soil, inspired by traditional indigo vat technique. And so I was dyeing secondhand textile taken from my family workshop. And then on this dyed textile, I was screen printing and transferring family photograph. And that's what we see here. And so during a residency in Italy the following month, I began to create that kind of huge like textile installation that kind of became this a self-portrait of my experience and of the complexity and nuance of my cultural heritage. I don't know if I'm going okay on time, but and just fast forward, when I came back to Canada, then it was the pandemic. It was 2020, and I could not rent a studio, so I started to do self-portraiture at home. And I like that idea of the self-portrait, of how you can, like artists have historically used self-portraiture as a way to reframe their personal narrative. If we think about Samuel Fosso and Zanele Miholi, Zora Opoku. There's so many artists that have been using self-portraiture as a way to talk about their personal experience and so for me self-portrait is a way to so here we see my grandmother in white traditional bubu, and here it's also her sorry, not white traditional bubu. This is her church attire because she was the leader of the choir in Douala, and this is a traditional bubu. And these are two framed portraits that I inherited from her last year after she passed away, and she nominated me as the new matriarch of the family because I'm the eldest daughter. So this diptych kind of represent a bit the duality that live within me, kind of having to take on that role while being in Canada, while also being like a queer artist and not being, my family not knowing that side of me also. So how does people from the diaspora live with dualities and sometimes contradiction? So yeah.
Thank you so much for that interesting contribution. Marija? So, just to inform you, Marija had an exhibition opening in Montreal yesterday. So, I was able to get into it. So his artwork is being viewed right now. What's the venue again? So if anybody...
Oh, at Hugues Charbonneau Gallery.
Okay.
In Montreal.
So, Marija, you employ a variety of media, including printing, video, and installation to interrogate history, memory, and identity. Can you share how your artistic practice serves as a means of question and reconstruction of historical narratives related to Africa and its diaspora?
Thank you for the question, and thank you to invite me in this panel again. I'm like an AGO kid because I'm coming a lot in the AGO now.
You're going to be adopted.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, thank you. So I think so for me, first of all, I didn't think to build or to reconstruct some things. The idea first for me was just to understand me. Because yes, I'm Congolese, but the country is, like I call that, is the utopia creation of Leopold II, the King of Belgium. Because before him, we didn't have a Congo. We have a main empire, many kingdom, and someday he decided to send Stanley and Livingstone, two people. They're going in this area we call Congo now, and they take some village, they kill some place. So he decided to have their own space. And many people that maybe many people they don't know the Congo first of all was not the Belgian colony, was the land of King Leopold II. And before him to die, he gave us to the Belgian people. So for that, for me, the first of all it was to understanding how he decided to create Congo. And that's becoming maybe, because yesterday I was thinking when I was read the question, and I was remember when I was decided to understanding that. And in my idea is becoming when I was watching the movie series called Shaka Zulu. I don't know if people call this series a good series, historical series. I was a very young kid when I was watching it. And what it was very, very interesting for me, it was the way Shaka Zulu was going to take the place in South Africa. So for me, it was like the same, not the same, but the same idea to to have space for your own, to decide I have a power and to go. And so that's why the first thing in my artwork, it was to see and to understand how Occidental people was using the map in the military way, and the economic way, and the civilian way. So the first painting I was made is I think so. Julie showed me something about the point. Ah yes, I love this. Oh yeah, I have the sign. I love that. But the first way for me was I starting this series called Chiromancy in 2006 when I was living in France, because when I go to study in France, it was the first time for me to see I will stay in Europe, so I will stay out of my country. And that give me that possibility, like I said, I'm becoming black in France. I think so it's the same for you. For all of that we're from in Africa, you're becoming black in the place where you go, because in my country, everybody are black. So the poor and the rich are black. So you don't have a time people will tell you, oh, you are black. So in France, I'm becoming black. So that bring me to read a lot about the story, and that bring me a lot to understanding. Because when I was studying in Kinshasa at Fine Art School of Kinshasa, it's very academic. So they teach us to paint like Rembrandt. They teach us to paint like Van Gogh. They teach us to paint like the Caravage. So you need to understand how they paint for you to paint. So I use the same technique for me to understand my own story. I ask many questions. I use the archive to see. First of all, it was for me to, I want to tell a story. I don't want to explain to someone, I'm black, I'm proud to be black. No, I want just to tell a story because I want just to understand. And because for me to understand, that helped me to not be angriness, not be, I don't know if I use the good word. Yeah, angry.
Anger.
Yeah, anger, to have anger. Because when I came in France, the first year I was angry every day. I was not understand. At school, I was the first, no, not the first, I was the only black at Fine Art School of Nantes. So every time you manage many things and you don't understand. And for me, it was like I was wasting my time to explain people. And one day I say, why I need to explain them? I'm Congolese, I'm from here. Because they already teach me French, so I speak French like them. And actually I love to use that idea. I'm like an AI, machine learning. Because they teach me everything. I learn. So now I can practice. If they ask me a question, I can speak about Victor Hugo, because they teach me Victor Hugo. So I was not understanding to say, but I'm like you because you teach me French. You kill some people in my country for me to becoming Catholics. I stay at church, I sing in the choir, I pray like you. So what's the difference now when I'm living with you? Because I'm like you. I'm not, yes, I'm still Congolese, but I'm also like you because I understand everything you can say. Understanding your food, understanding your language. For someone, I know better your story than you. So what is the difference? So the first year, like I say, it was like every time I want to explain. So I take that idea to say, I don't want to explain. I need to understand why they think I'm not like the people they was thinking. So I'm trying every time in my work to be like an accountant, to make stories. Because first of all, I didn't say that when I was in Kinshasa, I want to make a school, movie school, but we don't have a movie school. So my parents said you can make movie school. I was a singer, my parents said you can make music, because music for the gang people, you can make music. So I go to the art school. So the idea, the way I working is every time for my practice, it's like I make movie. So every series I made, It's like, for me, it's movie or series with episode. So that's why sometimes I make many series of painting. It's not the same every time. I can decide here, like I was saying, the idea to think the way I'm becoming Catholics. I discovered when I came in Canada, in Fine Art Museum of Montreal, some mask from the village of my mom. And when I go further, I discover it was the priest came with this mask here and they give donation to the museum. And there was the Jesuit. So I say, oh, it was the same priest when they came in the Congo, they teach us to be Catholics. Because they teach us also to not use again the mask. So why they came with that here? So every time it's kind of, okay, now I need to understand why they came with that here. So I need to understand. And after that, I decide to create something. And for me, when I create something, it's like now I feel better because I understand. And now it's like comment tu dis guérir de toi-même? Yeah, I'm healing myself. So my practice becoming also the way I can healing myself. So that's why sometimes I say, I don't care if people, they don't understand. Because for me, I tell story to healing myself. It's like, this it's now 10 years I have this image on my head, and it's a different part of story of my country, but I put that together in the same space. Because I was saying, we don't have time, because every time, I think so, that's my analysis. Like, as in the black people living out of continent, it's like we waste our time to deal with something like racism. Like, for me, I feel like we waste all time to explain people, and we don't have this time to understand better our story and to teach our story. So I have my daughter, she's on the painting, she has 4 years, and when she come in my studio, every time she was seeing the photo of colonization time in Congo, so she see the image is not very good, and my wife say, oh, you cannot take the image like this because she's very young. And I say, no, she need to see that. I need to understand how can I teach her, whatever she's very, very young, how can I teach her, not for her to steal with angriness, but to understand just the story. And I create a storytelling for her, so that's bring me to make this painting. And like here, but it's me again. Here it's the self-portrait, but that's linked with the story of the Congolese stole the sword of King of Belgium in 1960. When the King of Belgium came in Congo to read the independence declaration, someone stole his sword and it disappeared. And for me, it was very interesting to say, this guy is still the sword of the king, so it's like he take independence before him to say, I give you independence. And here you have the guy who was working in the rubber plantation when King of Belgium starting his plantation in Congo. And here is a story of Lumumba, because when the Belgium and the CIA, it's true, because the declassification of information, you can find that in internet. It's not me say that, it's US and Belgian people that say that. So when they decide to kill Lumumba, they put him on the acid, because they want him to disappear. So that image for me was like to say, it's like we lost the hope, because Lumumba was for white people he was the nationalist, but for us he was one of the guy who was thinking the Congolese need to have independence together, because some people in Congo in this time was say, oh, the people who was living in the Luba kingdom need to have independence. The people who was living in the Congo kingdom need to have independence. So Lumumba came with the idea to say, no, now we are Congolese, because we suffer together, they beat us together, so we need just to have independence together. So they put him in the aside because he was signing the paper with the Russian people. In this time, Russian and American, there was not friend. I think so today also. and they put him in eyesight. So for me, it was like, how can I tell the story to my children for her to understand different part time of the country of his dad, and also she's born here. So every time it's like I need to look to tell the story, to bring my Congolese story here, because now I'm living in Canada, but I need to make this story becoming also the Canadian story, not to be just to stay African or Congolese story.
Thank you so much. I like your passion about like even before you left to France, you've been a storyteller, and you have this burden of telling the story either by through film or music. So yeah, but just saying through the visual arts now. So that's interesting. But I just want to tell you that I love Congolese music.
This is the best.
Yeah.
But I know you were Nigerian, but
But Afrobeat is ruling.
yeah.
But however, it's not too late to follow your music career. so yeah, thank you, Hall. I see that from all your works and your passion and your practices, there are some common themes, and that's theme of identity, memory, and the theme of representation. So those things are common with the three of you, and you've been able to say it in different ways, but like just having those three themes in mind. So I discovered that you all use Icava materials in your practices. And so that's another something else I want us to discuss. So in different ways that you engage with the archives, are there some barriers you face in the archives, and your feelings about the archives? And even if does the archive look like a gate, like a gated knowledge? So I want your different experiences. So, Mr. Abraham, please.
The idea around archives for me, again, comes from the fact that I was thinking about photography in an expanded practice, right? And access to archive again becomes also very complicated, because you are interested in your story as a Nigerian, as an African, but you don't have access to certain archives, for example. And the question is, who decides this access? How do you gain access to certain archives? I remember one time I called British Museum and I asked for specific archive, and it was like, oh, they don't have it. I was like, this is interesting. I thought that was where I was going to find everything that, I need as regards to, the relationship that, Nigeria has with, Britain. But I think also one thing that I can't overly emphasize again is about art is also about problem solving. I don't think I didn't beat my head over it, but I think I was able to kind of almost make a U-turn and just find a cut, and that was books. Books are very, very important and very central to my practice. And I say it, I can't even overemphasize enough. Books that have been published 1912, 1910, 18 something. It's fascinating because it's loaded with information also, with the mindset that the world was going to remain the same. And for me, that's really interesting. So one of the ways that I've been able to break that power over access is to look at images from sourced, places, like just sourcing out images. And that's why I also feel like, the word archive again becomes problematic for me because it's very pedagogical again in science, right? Like, it's very academic. So I prefer to use like sourced images because I'm interested in looking and finding things that are interested to me, whether they are images, whether they are texts and diagrams. I'm very interested in the idea of making sense of the way that I've been perceived and begin to find ways that I can engage it, not just to dismantle it, but to create a new form of language. Because I think the ultimate agency for me is the fact that I can do what I like. And for me, that's just gratifying. The fact that I live today and I can do these things. I think it's enough, and I don't have to overly enforce myself that I'm black, I'm this. If I decide to draw a line on top of the image, so be it. That's the way I feel on the day. That's what I want to create. And on that basis, I just keep the flow going.
Thank you so much. Mallory.
So I think for me in my practice, I'm very interested in how gaps, void, omission, encourage like black artists, I would say, to create to use fiction and poetics and non-didactive notion to create work. And I think that gap sometimes can be act as kind of a terrain vague, like can be an opening to investigation and reimagination. And in that sense, I think what really interests me is the story of photography in itself, and how for a long time photography has been used as a tool of subjugation and power, and how how like for a long time we've seen ethnographic photography, anthropological photography, carte postale, and how it's one of the medium that has affected the most our Western understanding of the global South, of the continent. And I think that today, using photography to kind of reframe and reshape a new narrative, and reimagine a new ways of what being African can be, is very powerful. So yes, in my practice, I use a lot of photography and more specifically personal archive. These are most of the image work is personal archive. I haven't used yet like public archive, but I also use self-portraiture a lot. And so yeah.
Thank you so much. Like when you're talking about your like the family pictures, and I remember that my dad has like 3 boxes of pictures, and sometimes when I was very small, I just go there all day and just imagine how it was then and all that. And I think it's a great privilege. But can we compare? Now everything is stored online, and I don't know if people really get that access, like having the hard copy, like having the hard copy of those black and white pictures and all that. Yeah. So thank you so much for your contribution.
For me, like Abraham say, like for Congolese archive, if you want to see or to know many things, you need to go to Belgium. So, and sometime when I was in the Tervuren, is Musée Royal, the kingdom, the museum of Belgium, and sometimes they don't give you some archive. So the way, I trigger it, it's like I'm looking which company was exist in the time of colonization, and I will go to the story of that company and the story of the company that bring me to the archive I want. And sometime is to look the name of the military was in Congo in this time. So to look the name of the family and to ask some people if they know the family. Because in the family archive they have many things. That's the first way. And the second way is also to make many interviews. I ask questions when I go back to Congo. I have all the time I record people. I made many interviews. One day I remember I was speaking with my auntie living in Belgium. She was telling me the way Belgium was teach them to use toilet when they came in Belgium. So she called many women and everybody was telling me, and that helped me to make my own archive and to let that like 2-3 years, and after that to listen again and to find a way to use that. And also the way I'm using my art is like I made the new archive, because like I was saying, the old problem I see in Congo, maybe it's the same problem in a different country in Africa. We don't have the power to our archives, the colonial archives in the West, and actually people still buying archive in Africa. And in 10-20 years, all the artists that will have the same problem, because we don't have a power, actually we don't have a power in our archives. So the way I'm making my own art is also to say how this work can be the archives for the other artists that will use that. Because actually when I want to make my work, I go to see European painting. It's becoming like my archive also. So how can I make my own work becoming the archive for other people? So it's the way I found for me to create my archive or to find other archive in the West.
So thank you so much. Yeah, as regards the issue of archives, I know artists will make use of references, informed decisions, informations to create our works. So it may not be that the traditional archives, but colonial archives could be the library, it could be museums like this. I could remember a story about there was this event called Festac 77. It was Festival of Africa of arts, global Africa art, and they wanted to use there's this Benin plague they were going to use, and if you know about the desecration of the Benin Empire and so those works were in the British Museum. So like some Nigerian artists were sent to the archive to the museum under high security and to copy the work to be able to use it. So in regards of in the context of colonial archives and having most of the data stored in the West, I think maybe except for Mallory, I see like there have been issues of lack of access to archives, just like that story I narrated. So those are the things I see common with your work. So
Also, sorry, I would like to also add something. I'd like to say something. I think for For me again, what is important about archive again, it's also my curiosity about aesthetic. Perhaps maybe what I've been informed about aesthetic and what constitutes beauty is not. Because you find certain diagrams with certain that carry certain energy, really delicate, beautiful. Sometimes they could be archaeological diagrams that shows how certain things have been excavated. And you see the diagrams and you see the circles, you see the squares, really beautiful. But for me again, it's about the looting and extraction that diagram is conveying. And for me, this is really important to try to understand, like, what does this mean? Like, what I've been informed to think about beauty. Is it, or is it something in the middle? Is there something in the middle that I don't understand? I think for me, it's something that I'm trying to figure out as well. I think it's important that I don't believe that beauty is what that I've been informed that beauty is. That's the point.
Okay, thank you. I I want to ask the artist just a common question about issue of market. Um, yeah, because even as much as we want to convey our knowledge, our ideas, and want to speak our mind, even as regards the memory and all that. So, what about the market in arts? There's issue of the global center and the periphery, and how African artists and yeah, African diaspora artists, how their work is being bought and how the market is. Um, Being a diaspora in Canada, what do you want to say about the market? Um, do you feel you are getting that that recognition and to your counterparts? So, Mr. Abraham.
Um,
Sorry. So yeah, like, is there like those financial, yeah, gain, right? So well, I discovered that in Canada, I don't know, compared to the US, the market is different. Yeah. So how competitive it is, yeah, how is it turned into dollars in your account?
yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, it's important that you talk about, who the institution decides to enrich or not. I think that's a conversation on one side. But another thing for me again is the fact that moving to Canada again, you also have to think about how do you settle into a space? How do you practice? And it takes time. It does really take time. I think, like, it's taken me almost 5 years to be able to get a studio. Like, now I just moved to a studio at the cotton factory in Hamilton. But it's also taking me to move out of Toronto to go to, so one has to think about what is important for you. Am I interested in just living in Toronto just for the hype of it, or I'm interested in just practicing and having a space where I can engage my work, I can build something. I don't think it matters where you are. I could care less. I can actually live in a bush, like, as long as I have access to internet and just be able to kind of like just work. So for me, it's really important that one understand that this takes time, and also community is important as well. I'm here. I'm not in isolation. I'm interested in meeting other artists, other practitioners, from archaeologists to architects. I think it's important because that's what's going to build you. That translates to something financial eventually, but I'm not driven by that really. I'm very much driven by my ideas and the things that I have strong conviction about.
Okay, thank you so much, Mallory. Has been patronage. Yeah, sometimes I don't know. as humans and as creators, even though I feel, okay, a certain concept is being brought over and over. So does the markets also influence your creation, your ideas, your concept and your themes?
I think that's a very interesting question. um, I think I would say that the work I'm doing it for myself first, really, because I think it's coming from a place, or at least when I started like to be a professional artist in 2020, it started from a place where I needed to see that work and I needed to um, have some answered question answered in terms of my cultural heritage. That's the reason why I went to Cameroon a lot and spent a lot of time with my grandmother and did field and ground research for a couple months there each year. But it's a question I have to think about, you know. But yes, in some ways, you know, the because as an artist, there's many ways to sustain your practice, and one of them is selling your art, you know. And when you live in Canada, I think, you know, like you said, the market is different than the one in the US. So you kind of have to. I'm only starting right now to understand the Canadian market, and also as someone who is from European descent, but also African descent. What does it mean for me? Like, how is what I create understood by a Canadian francophone public as well? Because I'm living in Quebec, but you know, so so that's something that I'm learning right now. How the reception of my work is, you know, how it's received. But yeah.
Yes, Mr. Manager.
Ah, it's a big question. I think so. We don't have time to speak about that today. And because you say now it's I think so it's 12 years or 30 I live in Canada. So I'm asking my question when I will become Canadian artist, because we're speaking about African artists, but I don't live again in Africa. I go back in Africa every time. And that brings the question of how market describe us. That's it's very important, because also in the market the price of our work is different than other artists from European artists, American artists, or Black American artists. So like Maurice from Quebec, and the market in Quebec is different than Toronto. And also the chance we have, for me, the chance we have to live in Canada, because we have a ground. And so sometimes you can have that, sometimes no. But when you have that, it's very, very, very interesting. And also, like I was saying first, is I'm not changing my work because of the market. When I was living 10 years in France, nobody buy my work. So it's the same work I'm using here. So for me, it's that question. I decide when I go to Biennale of Dakar, and I was in Dakar, I see many artists from different country in Africa or in the diaspora. Is the day I understand I will stay African in my art. Whatever I stay 20, 15 years in Canada, I will stay African artist. It's not a problem for me, it's fine. But the question is, the market still Occidental. Because in Africa, we have a market, but it's not the market as us an artist we want. You know, we want to be in the museum, we want to be in the big collection, we want to go in the Biennale. And that brings us to depend on this market. So it's like, I don't know how to explain that, but it's a ghost market for me, because I don't know if it's the if it's the good word, but for me it's like it's kind of something we don't understand how it works. We understand, but sometimes we don't understand, and we don't understand who decide. And so, sometimes I'm very happy, to be in the AGO collection. I'm very happy when some collector buy my work. But again, every time I say I sell my work here, I think so in all work I sell, I have just 2 people are black buy my work. And another question is, which kind of access our people having the work we made, because we made the work speaking about colonization, speaking about the way they thinking about us, but that work is buying by other people. I'm fine if someone buy my work here. I'm fine. I'm not saying don't buy my work, but just that yes we sell, but we are asking the question about that market, because market is not just the fair market, also people buy the work because that's people they will give to their children they will give to their children again. So we are speaking about archives again. For me it's like we lost again that kind of archive, because we have a museum in Africa, but that museum they don't have the money to buy our work. So like that's why I say it's a big question. And for me I want to think again, I want to understand everything, but so we want to think big to understand the way we will go. Like actually people are saying, oh, African art is that's the new age. Many Fair 154 going to Marrakesh, and now Akka, they say they will go to South Africa. Yes, but this money, it's us, diaspora artists, we take this money. I'm fine, give me this money. But the question is, how African artists living in the continent, they can benefit on this market also. So, it's a kind of the question I'm questioning myself every time, but I'm happy to continue to buy my art, please.
So are you saying that your work is at the high?
Oh, it's not at the high.
Okay.
I need to go at the high.
Okay.
Yeah. I need to work.
Even in the ghost market?
When I say ghost market, because in the art, no one know the money working in the art market.
So much,
it's like, yeah, that's why I say ghost.
I understand. It was just an interesting term. Yeah, and so thank you all for your contributions. I want to ask if the audience have any questions for the panelists. So.
Thank you all. Fascinating, wonderful. I've learned so much and been inspired by your journeys. And I'm want to double back to what you said about identity. And what do you think will happen to that identity with the next generation of, I guess, diaspora artists? Like, some of you are parents, some of you are not, some of you may become parents, and your children may become artists or may not become artists, but how do you think your heritage and your identity as your history, how will that manifest in the next generation? Will it be sustained? Should it be sustained? Like, you don't want to be an African artist who happens to live in Canada. You want to be an artist who happens to have an African heritage. How does that manifest itself with the next generation of artists?
I will speaking a little bit about money. I know people don't like to speak about money. But I think for me, for my understanding, for me to help my story still continue, my identity still continue, I need to work for my children to have money. That kind, because we still in the world where money is the power. Money gives the possibility, like, to buy art, to give donation to the museum. And museum, books, music. Like we say, culture is for me the essence of our identity. Yes, I'm living in Canada. My wife, she's not Congolese, she's from Guadeloupe. So my kid, she will have the both identity plus the Canadian identity. But one day, someone will ask her the question, where are you from? But she's born here. So I need to play with that. And that's why I was saying I'm teaching my kid to not be angriness with that, but to know how to play with that. So for me, the idea is to teach them very early to understand the game and to teach them how they can be on the place where people decide to make the possibility that story continue.
I'd actually like to add and give my perspective. I think that's a very good question, very important question as well. It's it's a struggle. It's a struggle when you have first an experience of shock of having to travel through the airport and having, for example, a Nigerian passport, and you travel a lot and you're constantly singled out. That changes the dynamics of your understanding of whether you want to, like, what does this mean? Why is this so important to you? Because I live this and I don't want my children to live this. And I think it's important because I listen to classical music. I listen to Brazilian music, Congolese music. I'm very open to these various possibilities. I have a 9-month-old son. He's Canadian. He's going to live his experience. He's going to express himself as a Canadian, even though he's part Indian, part Nigerian. I think it's important that people understand that the fact that I'm making this work, I'm not making this work because I'm trying to throw tantrum, or it's the fact that it comes from my personal experience, a lived experience that perhaps some people have no idea about. But it is important that I see through that and be able to create something that transcends us all. Just like I listen to Brian Eno's music for Airport and I just feel lost. I listen to Philip's Glass composition and I just feel like, oh my goodness, there are no boundaries in the arts. There's no such thing as African artist, or an artist is an artist, but I'm not going to deny my personal lived experience because it's part of my fabric as a human being. And that will, from time to time, come out in various aspects of my practice. Thank you very much. I really love that. And thanks for your honesty as well.
I think I'm interested in condition of how the condition of urbanization can be compared to the condition of globalization, meaning that today's we see on the continent a lot of people moving from rural area going to city center. And so we have mega cities on the continent. There's Kinshasa, in Lagos, we have Cairo. So city with more than 10 million people, and it's in 2030 it's thought that there would be double that number. So when you think about that, it means that these cities that kind of live in a in-between state, so with post-colonial, post-independence, colonial and modern architecture, and there's this desire for these urban center to reflect cities from the West. But then there's the reality of the ground, and so people find themselves having to rethink way of organizing, ways of living, of working, and so this kind of is a fertile ground also for artists on the continent to create work that reflect that present moment right now, that is in 2024. And so when we talk about urbanization, then we also talk about globalization, because then there's the diaspora, the African diaspora, and we talk about mixity and complexity and nuance and experience that are like different from people that go to Europe or that migrate to Canada. And so I think in a way the future is a more global world. But what does that mean? You know, I don't have the answer, but I know that for me, because I'm a product of that in a way. My father immigrated in Belgium, and then he met my mother, and then they moved here, and I think it's gonna be that more and more, and I'm not sure what we can do to stop that, or do we want to stop that? What does it mean to so yeah, I'm just thinking out loud here. Yeah.
Thank you. Well said. Can I just chip in my own? The term African artist, African diaspora, or whatever, like there have been some debates about it, right? And there's this essay by a lady called Tai Salasi, and she had a term called Afropolitanism, and so it talks about globalization and being a local of where you are, even though you have the identity of where you're coming from. We've had different, like in Nigeria, there was a lady that stayed there for more than 50 years. Her name is Susan Wenger, and she lived there. She practiced art. So, but she's Austrian. She's Austrian, and she came with her husband, Oliver. So, but she's termed as an African artist, right? Because so there are different layers and nuances to the term African artist, especially in this age of globalization. Thank you.
Can I suggest something? Maybe I'm not the guy like globalization, because for me the globalization, it's like come to erase something. I don't have a problem with globalization. Like I say, we learn from every culture. I'm eating Indian food. When I was in Congo, I was not eating Indian food. I'm watching movie from Brazil, so it's not problem for me. But the way I'm thinking it, I need to be single to understand my own story, to take all the story. So sometimes when people speaking about globalization, it's like when French people are speaking about universalism. It's like, for me, it's like, no. Because if I ask them, which is the globalization, where is my place to that globalization, they will teach me again the Occidental globalization. They will not teach me the African globalization. So that's why every time I'm like, that term of globalization, for me, it's becoming like just to maintain like everybody are the same, but we are not the same. But it's not a problem, it's fine. But we can just take the richness of someone and to become. I know Niger food. I've never been in Nigeria, so that again the music, the Niger music. I love that. I've never been in Nigeria, but again, when we're speaking about globalization, it's like we're becoming the same. But for me, I want the Nigerian people still with their own identity. Me as a Congolese, I say with my own identity, but I'm open to take what is very interesting and can help me to be more rich. That's why I say that for me, that's the idea I was saying. That's why I say when I listening about globalization, I'm like, sorry.
Understood, yeah. So, thank you. Any other question?
Yeah, I think we can take one more question.
thank you for a great series of talks. Sorry, I'm documenting because every time I'm in these spaces with Black folks talking, what you're saying is so important that we don't lose and that we capture. So my question was, I was very interested in the bookend speakers who talked about that thing about how we learn about what is beauty. And then the other speaker on the other end who talked about the whole idea of really we're talking about a commodification of art and how it begins to be, monetized in certain ways, and then who benefits mostly. And even your last thing about sort of the whole idea of unpacking globalization to look at really power, who ends up really having power in all of it. Even when we're talking about transnationalism and hybridization and all of those complexities of your daughter with a a triple heritage, right? To kind of reference to, because I'm curious, as a question to all of you on the stage, about as folks with African continental heritage, an experience that, whenever I've traveled there, as I do anywhere else in the global south or the global east, I'm really struck that a lot of what we now think about as art, historically people created, and it wasn't necessarily commodified, right? I think of the masks, I think of the things that were used in daily life, the pots, the clothing, as you talked about, right, in the middle there, right? And lots of ways that we engage with things that now are seen as they're commodified goods, right? And one of the things I found horrific sometimes when I was on the continent was being in certain marketplaces, art marketplaces, and lots of people from the West are there battling with the local folks to, get the cheapest price for things that we know that when they bring it to the West, they're charging astronomical prices, right? Or they go into collections of museums and galleries. And so I'm curious about your thoughts about that, and even again those questions you asked, if you've had any answers just based on your own historical lineages to think about, these things that are now being created and commodified and monetized. When I think about my heritage and the places of origin, that there's so much evidence of rich art, practice, creation, creativity that wasn't necessarily about money. It was just about the way we live with beauty and a certain idea of different kinds of beauty. And I wonder how that has sometimes conscripted or limited the ways in which you have to navigate, because you're being framed by a different idea of what beauty is, or a particular kind of standard of beauty that then disempowers the histories of beauty that you've lived with and that you bring to the table. So hopefully you can say something about some of all of that. Thank you.
I mean, it's interesting because you've asked the question, but you've also answered it. So. Thank you so much. You're right. I mean, I've always been fascinated by the idea of beauty, but also how it frames your mind, right? And, for me, it's just important to kind of like have a level of consciousness to actually understand that who you are and where you're coming from is as powerful as the classical works that you find in Rome or in Greece, and where these hierarchies are collapsed. And for me, that's really one of the reasons why I'm very fascinated by aesthetic and by beauty, because there's a deep-rooted philosophy within it itself, and it's something that I just find very, very enriching, and just like to swim in and hopefully, find some resolve. But it's a journey, it's every time I'm trying to make sense of it,
No, if you don't, it's not okay. If no more questions, we thank you all for attending. And I believe the galleries are still open. And I think Mallory has the work in which of the...
No, not right now.
Not right now. Okay.
At the age, no.
Okay. So we thank the organizers and we thank the panelists for the very enriching conversation, and everybody who had attended. And so is there any, Maria? So thank you. Have a nice day.
work this way.